I once spoke on those words from John chapter 13 at a family service. I never like to give too much away, so all I did was ask for 2 volunteers to come out and help me, and out came 2 very well groomed, very clean little girls. They weren't mine. It was all very jolly and lovely until I sat one of these little girls on a stool, and then I fished out a bucket of water and some soap, and I asked the second girl if she would be willing to wash the first girl's feet. It's quite a spectacle watching somebody else washing somebody else's feet. I was very grateful it was 2 girls, actually, and not 2 boys. And you should be very grateful that this is not a family service. Otherwise, it might be you. Somebody said to me afterwards, that is an experience that neither of those girls will ever forget. Let me tell you, in New Testament times, when these events in John 13 were written, you did not sit on a chair to eat. You reclined on a couch. And so you would have somebody else's feet in your face. And feet back then were probably even more unpleasant than they are today. It was very hot, and the roads were full of dung from donkeys and camels and horses and goodness knows what else. And so at dinner time, cleaning feet was a pretty essential job, but it was a horrible job. It was a mean job. It was not a job that you volunteered to do, and yet the person who gets up and does it is Jesus, the Master, the Lord, the Chief Shepherd. And the Apostle Peter was there, and so often when you read these stories, everyone else is speechless at what Jesus is doing, but Peter's never short of a word, so he gets up and says, "You're not washing my feet." "No way," he says, "you're never, ever going to wash my feet. I'm not going to allow it." And Jesus says, verse 8, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Peter, Jesus says, you must let me wash you. You must. And you know, Jesus says the same to every single one of us. He says, Louis, you must let me wash you. James, you must let me wash you. Claire, you must let me wash you. He's not talking about water. He's not even talking about feet. He's talking about his blood. It's the night before he's put on a cross and killed. And so the cross looms massively over every word that is spoken that night. Washing feet points to the even greater act of love and cleansing that is to come the next day through the suffering and death of Jesus. So you think, how are sinful people to relate to God? How is it possible? It's through Jesus' cleansing death on a cross. And as we said last week, it's by continuing day by day, week by week, to confess our sin and to receive that cleansing, that forgiveness through his death. Can I say that part of this foot washing story is very often missed, but it's very important to see it. How are we to relate to God? It's through Jesus and his death. But the story sets up another question. How are forgiven sinners supposed to relate to each other? How are forgiven sinners to relate to each other? And the key is verse 15. It's on the other side, right at the end of that John reading. Verse 15. Jesus says, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." Peter is there. He sees it. His feet are the ones that are washed. He hears what Jesus says. And years later, he then writes this letter, which we know as 1 Peter. And he wants us to know how to lead, how to live, how to serve, and how to keep going as Christians. And it seems to me that as he wrote 1 Peter, he may well have had that night, the night before Jesus was put on a cross and killed, he may have had that night in mind. He may have had that foot washing session. He may have had Jesus' example in mind. Because it seems to me that you could sum up everything that Peter is saying with one word. And that word is humility. Humility. And I want to say again, humility goes with forgiveness. One of the things I didn't say last week, but I'm going to say it now, is that we need to be people who are quick to forgive and who are slow to be offended. Have you noticed that there are some people you meet and you just have to work so hard to offend them? You ever meet people like that? You've really got to try to offend them. The key is that they are people with godly humility. Godly humility is the key to not being easily offended. Now, please understand, I need to hear this more than absolutely anybody else. But you see, the more I know my own failings, the more I know my own shortcomings, the more I understand God's grace and what he's done for me, the more generous-spirited that's going to make me, and the more humble towards the people around me. Please, we need to be quick to forgive, and we need to be slow to be offended, and that comes from humility. Let me go through some of the practical wisdom that Peter gives us in that first reading. So if you could have that in front of you now, that reading from 1 Peter. He starts off with elders, and that just means church leaders, but I reckon it applies to all of us. He calls himself, verse 1, a witness of Christ's sufferings and one who will also share in the glory to be revealed. He is saying to every single one of us that the shape of the Christian life is meant to be a cross. The shape of our lives is meant to be a cross. Jesus went through suffering to glory. There was no shortcut. There was no glory without the suffering. And Peter says to every single Christian, the Christian's life is going to be the same. When Jesus returns, says Peter, he will appear as the chief shepherd. That's verse 4. But it's worth remembering that when Jesus came the first time, he didn't come as a shepherd, he came as a lamb. He came to suffer and to die in great weakness. And so Christian leadership and Christian service is a call to come and die. It is a call to a cross-shaped life. I wonder if I dare read some words from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some of us were at a conference a few weeks ago, and the speaker said that amongst the very least achievements of Dietrich Bonhoeffer was that the speaker had named his dog after him. It's almost worth getting a dog, isn't it? But not quite. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German Christian, and he was martyred by the Nazis in 1945. He said lots of extraordinary things. Just hear one thing he said. He said, when Christ calls someone, he bids them come and die. Suffering is the badge of true discipleship. If we refuse to submit to suffering and rejection at the hands of men, we forfeit our fellowship with Christ. And we have ceased to follow him. Do you know, somewhere along the line, we have acquired an extraordinarily bland and comfortable view of the Christian life. It is not meant to be bland. It is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be cross-shaped. Do you know, I wonder if I dare tell you this story. This goes pretty close to the grain for some of us. I read it the other day. It was one of those moments when you're trying to go to sleep, you're just sort of drifting off, and this little story makes you laugh out loud. You can't get to sleep. But it's from John Piper, American pastor. And he says, consider this story from Reader's Digest a few years ago. A couple in America took early retirement from their jobs. He was 59, she was 51. They now live in Florida, where they cruise on their 30-foot trawler, playing softball, presumably not on the trawler, and they collect shells. At first, he says, when I read it, I thought it might be a joke, a spoof on the American dream. Come to the end of your life, your one and only precious God-given life, and let the last great work of your life, before you have to stand and give an account to your Creator, be this: playing softball and collecting shells. Picture them, he says, before Christ on the great day of judgment. Look, Lord, see my shells. It's funny, isn't it? It's very close to the truth of my life and your life. That, he says, is a tragedy. And people today are spending billions to persuade you to embrace it. Over against that, he says, I put my protest. Don't buy it. Don't waste your life. You've woken up now, haven't you? Don't waste your life. It's meant to be the shape of a cross. Peter goes on. He says, verse 2, serve. Serve not because you must, but because you are willing. Serve not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. I once actually heard someone say at the front of a church, if you're, and this is very appropriate on the day of our APCM, this guy stood at the front of the church and he said, if you are serving in this church today out of guilt, I want you to resign now. But before you form the queue to do that, he said, I want you to go one more time to the cross, and I want you to remember what Jesus has done for you. Still, verse 2. Peter says Christian service should be eager to serve, not greedy for money. He says greedy for money. Some of us can be greedy for money, but you know, lots of us are greedy for status. Lots of us are greedy for applause. We're greedy for a pat on the back. Look what I've done. Look, have you seen what I've done? I've done it again. Have you seen that? Lots of us are greedy for affirmation, for self-esteem, for popularity. But what you need, says Peter, is to be eager to serve. Do you remember a couple of years ago, some of us went to the SGP annual conference. William Taylor was the main speaker. He's very posh. He used to be in the army. He's now the rector of a massive church in London. And he said when he was at Sandhurst, which is the officer training college for officers in the British Army, he said that every single new recruit used to be given a book by the British Army. It was called Serve to Lead. Serve to lead. In other words, we want you to know, say the British Army, we want you to know, if you want to be an officer in the British Army, the most important thing about leading is serving and your example. How does Jesus, the chief shepherd of the flock, lead? How does Jesus lead? I'll tell you how he leads. He leads by serving and dying. Just like when we looked at Titus, it's very striking. The qualifications for church leadership do not say anything about having vision. They do not say anything about having skills or gifts or core competencies. Believe you me, if you want to be a head teacher of a school, you need all of those things in spades. But actually it doesn't come up here. The Bible never encourages us to identify our gifts and skills and then serve in that area because we find it fulfilling. Do you know, the Bible never tells us to do that. That is modern church, me-centered speak that says, oh, find your gifts and serve where it fulfills you. No. God says, get serving and I will show you the gifts. Get serving and I will show you, I will give you the giftedness. As Tim Chester says, you really will experience more of God washing dishes than meditating on retreat. Do you know, ladies, if you wash dishes, thank God, you will know more of God washing dishes than people who go on a retreat. It's true. So bless you. Well, let me finish with those two commands in verses 6 and 7, right at the end there. Verse 6, Peter says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. It's humility again. Pride despises other people and rebels against God. But the antidote for pride is humility. I've got a £1 coin here. Don't all rush at once. Okay? I don't know if this is going to work, but this is what often happens when you drop a £1 coin. Yes, it goes exactly where you don't want it to go. But often, if you're in the house, have you noticed if you drop a £1 coin, what does it do? It rolls away, doesn't it? It rolls away to the furthest corner. It rolls under the cupboard, or it rolls under the piano. It rolls where you can't get it. You stoop down to get it, and it's gone. Well, can I tell you, and I know some of you are really hurting this morning with stuff that's happened, but sometimes God puts things into our lives in order to deal with our pride. He puts stuff into our lives to bring us down so that then he can stoop down and he can lift us up. But the problem is that so often we're like a £1 coin. When something bad happens to us, we roll away and we hide in the furthest corner. We hide from the thing itself and we hide from God. And so when he stoops down to lift us up, where are we? We're not there. We're not there. But what have we said? Jesus is our example. He is our model. He humbled himself. He served and he died. But it wasn't just suffering. God reached down and he lifted Jesus from that suffering and he put him into glory. From suffering to glory. If our lives are cross-shaped, then God is going to stoop down and he is going to lift us up. And he will do it in due time. He will do it in his time. The one condition is that we humble ourselves and do not hide from him. And then lastly, verse 7, last thing I want to say, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. The link with humility is that worry stops me serving. Worry stops me putting other people first. So I think, will there be enough food for me today? Will there be enough food for my family today? Will there be a space for me in the team? Will my family be okay if I take on that job or that responsibility, whatever it is? Will I look stupid if I don't get this done perfectly? What will people say? Worry, 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 and it stops me serving. And Peter says, cast your anxiety onto him. Transfer your worries onto him. God is powerful enough to bear them, and he is caring enough to take them. But here's the thing, you cannot cast your cares onto him unless you have first cast your sin onto him. Humble yourself to take hold of the free forgiveness that he offers, and then humble yourself enough to cast on him your anxiety. Do you know, if he can take your sins, he can certainly take your cares. We live in a really big, confusing world where there is trouble. There is trouble everywhere. But once he's dealt with our sin, we are in relationship with an even bigger God, a God who is far bigger than all of your troubles, who is in charge of this world. He has a purpose for you in every situation where you have trouble. Forgiveness and humility, they go together. If you've got those, they will help you to get out of your anxiety. Forgiveness and humility, twins that go together. Amen.